Hello world, Great Giza Pyramid. Today we're going to be discussing the plateau and the structures upon the plateau. So first let's look at the plateau looking down upon it. To the northeast, we have the primary pyramid. And it is actually perfectly square, so I'll make it so. To the south and a little bit to the west, there is what is the second pyramid. And then to the south and a little bit less to the west, we have what I like to call Building 7, or the third of the largest pyramids. Now, on top of that, there are three other major structures over here to the side. Building 3, 4, and 5. Then you have Building 6, 8, and 9. Now, if you want to argue with me about the layout, I'd be glad to, but please provide me evidence. This is the structure that we are going to be talking about, the layout that we're going to be talking about. What I'm going to have to do right now, before we proceed, is give you some mental changes that we're going to be adding. We're going to be putting a moat around the outside of the structure. It seems to come across and it actually extends out here. You can look, there's lots of smaller structures, nowhere near as high in elevation as what we refer to as the pyramids, but they are littered throughout this, and they are very important, but they seem to be in that area. And it does look like, when you look at it, they extended it out over here, and they extended it out this direction. Actually, it looks like it kind of wrapped around here. And you can look at all the structures in there, but all of those are going to be in a moat. And you notice that all their elevations, they're all like so. All their elevations are consistent. That's because there was a water level, and we're going to get to that. Or you can pretend that they were whatever they were, but in our reconstruction of this particular setup, we're going to put a moat there, and we're going to put the water level so it's even with the top of all of those structures across the entire plane. Now, can't say the entire plane, because this pyramid is actually at a higher elevation, and we'll get to that shortly. But this pyramid, there's another moat, and it goes around, and I'm drawing it like this because when you look at the topology, you can see it actually extended out that direction. And then there's another one around this structure, which actually I think it extended out this direction, but we can look at that. Now, the Sphinxy dude is actually located over here at an angle that way, and then other construction is there, and there's a path going there. Now, what we're going to do real quick is I'm going to point out to you, right outside of the major pyramid, to the east of it, there is a large hole right there in the ground. You can even see it from things like Google Maps. You can zoom in on it. And you notice that even though I drew this, I'm going to take that out so I can just point out to you what's physically here. There is an opening in the ground there, an opening in the ground here, and then right here is nice, smooth, visually black rock. It's a different rock. And there's another opening right here. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to actually make this the spillway, and the water is going to go out this direction. Now also within our setup, we're going to do some Halliburton geoengineering here, and we're going to I'm going to say remove, but for those who don't believe it, we're going to move the Nile River so it actually comes around this way. And if you look at the topology, it'll wrap around and go out. So since the Nile River is one of those unique rivers that comes from the south, it comes from the plains of Africa and empties out into the Mediterranean Sea, it actually goes from south to north. And it would come around. I didn't draw this at the right scale, but if I did, and we put these pyramids here, here, and here for the three major ones, the Nile River will actually come around and go that way. It seems to wrap around. I think it actually kind of took a tight bend here when you look at it. And that was utilized because if you look, again, Google Maps, there's a big area right here that I think they took the force of the river coming around and used that to direct some of the water into a system which would pull it up, and we'll get to how, well, it doesn't even matter how. They have things like the Archimedes screw, and we have water pressure pumps, and there are lots of really cool things you can do with spirals where you put them in the water, and as they're turning, the water flow makes them turn, and it elevates the water up. And you can find these things. If you really can't, I can send you videos on YouTube. They work. But there are many ways to elevate water. So let's get past that. But the water would be elevated and then brought into this system that we're going to discuss here shortly. In addition to that, you can look, there are what nowadays they call caves, but prior to that, when the water level was higher, there are aquifers that actually run throughout the plateau, and in this case they would run south to north because that is the way the water would go. Although the water whips back and forth because naturally it does that, the aquifers are going to follow that same direction even though they may not be whipping back and forth. So there is going to be a water flow underneath the structure, and that will get more relevant when we look into following the electrons and the way that water and magnetism work and how the structure actually functions. But you do need to be aware of what actually exists. Now, in addition to that, this whole plateau is littered with nice rectangle. I'm not going to say square because actually when you look at them, some of them are rectangle, some of them are square, and you can follow them throughout the system because they try to stay consistent on their sizes, so you can kind of tell what hole does what. But you know, that's just fact is that they stay consistent. It's my belief that they stay consistent so you can tell what hole ends up where. You know, kind of how we color code wires in telephones and stuff like that, so we can tell on the other end which wire started on what end. But right now I'm looking for a old sock. Let's go ahead and look at the structure on a 2D plane horizontally at this point. Because I think we've, the 2D plane, looking down upon it, we've finished. Oh, I didn't get over the spillway, so let me touch that real quick. On the east side of the major pyramid, I'm going to draw it the same direction. You've got two openings, black rock, another opening, and you can see they like to say there was a causeway. I'm not telling you it's a causeway, I'm going to tell you it's a spillway. That rock there kind of looks like that. This here is more shaped like that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to utilize the existing structure. We're going to use this for a footing, and we're going to use this as a lifter. And on this side, we're going to put a structure with very large doors that when you pull the door, bracing yourself upon the ground, and as it pulls, that door will roll up, allowing the water to spill underneath the spillway and out into the Nile. Okay? I think that's pretty clear. So now you know how we're going to utilize the existing structures on the plateau. Now, one thing that they like to say, we're going to put the pyramids in the same way, pyramid number 1 here. I like to call that pyramid the largest structure on the planet. So I'm going to debate with you that there's pyramids in China measuring up to 880 feet. There's pyramids in Bosnia, and there are several other pyramids on the planet. The one in Bosnia, I believe, is 720 feet. There are ones that are 500 feet, and other ones. This one, they like to tell you is 480 feet, but really, because they chopped the top off and put the rock garden up there, it's really only approximately 450 feet. Only 450 feet, yeah, not a big deal. It's approximately as tall as Building 7 before it fell on September 11th. But we're not going to go there, are we? Now, the other structure that's on the plateau, yes, I'm doing this intentionally, is the one that stands next to it, structure number 2. It is shorter from ground to top because it is at a higher plateau. And then the next one, building 7, is shorter yet and at a slightly higher plateau again. Now, in the big thing, that doesn't matter too much, but nowadays we know of static electricity. We didn't know of static electricity until about the 16th century. Faraday and his glass rods were sitting there rubbing. Over there. And playing with static electricity. And we also know that prior to us putting the relieving antenna up on the top there, that relieves the static electricity from the structure, that people could go up onto the structure, fill their Leyden jars, come back down and do cool scientific experiments. They didn't have Van de Graaff generators, and they didn't have Windhurst generators and things like that at the time, so they were kind of stuck on using this structure. Now, I'm going to tell you the reason this structure was able to not generate, but collect static electricity, is because A, it has a lack of a top to vent it, which again we have replaced with that little antenna up there. And it also has, at approximately, if I get my levels right, here, the 35th level. Now I drew this off, but I have to draw that 35th level here because of the rest of what, when we build out the structure, you'll see. That 35th level is, when you look at the side of the structure, it has a deeper and taller step. They like to say than any other step on the structure, but in reality, the two here at the bottom are actually larger. And this was documented by Mr. Bergdahl, I think, in the 1800s, where he took the painstaking task of measuring all of the steps, and this being the 35th, you can see on this little graph, is the tallest that is shown on this graph. Now, there are two at the bottom that are taller. Don't want to deceive you there. I want to be factual. And you can also see that there is a sweeping structure. And what that will do is the static electricity, which normal everyday brush discharge deposits onto the structure, just like it does this one and this one, is going to get quarantined to the structure because it can't get past this barrier and it can't alleviate itself out. So in ours, we're going to take off that. And this is going to generate static electricity. And this static electricity is going to have a negative charge because it's electrons, and we have deemed that to be negative. Or when you look at it as magnetism, it's going to have a southern polarity. Now, this structure also has a step at approximately this level when you look at the structure where the surface comes in a bit and then it goes up. And when it gets up here to the top, it has a nice smooth surface. And if you look at it using, again, something like Google Maps, you can even see that there's a bit of a ground that comes down. Now, in addition to that, I didn't get over this. We're not going to bicker over the exact number of inches, centimeters, or cubits, or whatever. We're going to call this 1 unit. This right here is your 1 unit. From here up, the surface has a gradient, a step. We're going to call it 3/5, just for the heck of it, giving it a number. But as you see, it actually does sweep, and we'll get into that a little bit, but I don't want to get into too much detail right now. Below here, it's about 4/5 until it gets down to the bottom where it actually is greater than 1. But that's not as relevant as the rest. Over here, that step is slightly larger than 1. Sorry, slightly larger than 1. And from here up, it's 4/5. And if you look at the structure, you notice that there's a change in gradient, which makes this 2/5 and 3/5. Okay? There's your change in gradients. Now, what this does is, in comparison to this structure, which is negative, this allows the static electricity, the brush discharge static electricity, to vent upwards and out of the structure. This is comparable to the antenna we put on top of the structure today. This side of the pyramid, or this particular pyramid, will have a positive, double positive, and triple positive in comparison to that structure. This structure is a consistent gradient for practically the entire thing. We can dig into the fine points later, but for right now, we're going to call it 3/5. So this one, in comparison to these two, is going to be the neutral, the middle. Let's see what color. We should make that blue. So this is going to be our, well, it's not really the empty set. That's a different thing. It will be, I don't know, ground. What it was ground? Bing, 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 bing. That's the representation for ground, right? I think I have it right. That's ground, right? So that's our ground. That's negative, negative, positive. So what are we going to do? We're going to utilize the conduits that exist underneath the structure. We're going to pull the electrons that are in abundance on this structure, tempt them to come to this structure, and catch them. Where do we catch them? That's the nice part. On the structure is another piece that they like to call the mass burial chamber. This is a large room that people can walk through. I think they call it the cerebellum or cerebellum, or no, cerebellum is part of your brain. I like to call it the quesadillum, seize the day. In here are 20 plus, I think it's 23 or 24. They like to call them caskets, but I will call them boxes that are all at a like elevation. So if we were to stare at these things next to each other, they are all at the same elevation. They all have a division, and they're all nicely placed in there. We will call this salt water, salt water, brine water battery. Again, something in the 1600s, before we really understood electricity, we had no idea what a battery was. So even though we've been walking through it for hundreds of years, it wasn't seeming to click. So we're going to call this our battery. And I'm just going to stick it down here. You can fill in the blanks. I will gladly give you links so you can see it. There are people who have walked through it, hundreds and hundreds of pictures. I'm not making it up. It exists. So here we are on this structure. What are we going to do? Well, I did tell you that how this sweeps the static up. The static electricity, if I had a red pen, fine. Static electricity is going to work its way, being pushed up the system to approximately that level. See any correlation there? That level, top of this, above the division? No? No? Okay. Within the structure, we're going to pull that static electricity down using the one conduit that does not breach the surface. We are going to coax it down into the system till we get it. Actually, if that's the 35th step, this comes down below that because the 35th step is at the same level as the top of the arc chamber. Okay, and this is our pool, which goes down. Now I'm not drawing it to scale, but anybody who's familiar with the structure, we can debate it in many of my other videos. I'm happy to fill in the blanks. Where's the grotto? The grotto is actually slightly above ground level, and that comes up to there. So what are we going to do? Well, up here, we're going to do something really simple. Again, we did not know. And this is the only one that actually vents to the outside world. So what are we going to do up here? We're going to take hydrogen, which actually we're going to pull out of this room here. We'll get to that when we engineer the room. We're going to burn hydrogen along with oxygen that is found outside here. The stuff we breathe every day is 21% oxygen. Okay, that is going to be brought into the system just because it's air, like a furnace. And mixed with the hydrogen is going to make water. That water is going to then make steam, which is going to come up this channel. And it doesn't really matter how far it comes up the channel because it will eventually condense and become water and start dripping down. Now all that water I'm going to call charged because it's going to have some electrons, electrostatic electricity around the outside of its piece of water, its droplet of water. That charged water is going to come down into the grand gallery, where you notice the vaulting in the room is such that any of the drips, actually I did that wrong, it goes this way. Any of the drips are going to come down and fall into the structure, and you notice in the room, again I didn't draw this to proportion, this is optical, it's not there. The top of the structure looks like very poorly so, comes down, comes over. Okay, the drips are all, and I blew this up because this is only like 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet. The drips are not going to be falling into the center because of how the top is flat, but the drips will be falling to the side of the channel down the middle. But again, that's when we get more into reverse engineering the structure within the inside. But what I'm getting at is the way that it's constructed, there's always going to be drops falling down. Every drop is going to help pull a piece of static electricity down. Every piece of static electricity that pulls down, another piece of static electricity is going to jump in to take its place. And by doing this, we're going to continue to pull the static electricity down, 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 until it rides on the surface of the water. Static electricity doesn't drive in the water, it rides on the surface of the water. So in this particular room, we're going to have a lot of electrically charged steam. And as it's condensing, it's losing more surface space, more surface space, more surface space, to the point where it's actually going to generate enough electricity that it's going to arc. Hence the reason I call it the arc room. And because of the way we have the situation set up, with this being connected through conduits to that structure, and this one connected through conduits first to the battery, and then to that structure, and again we can worry about fine points later. As the static electricity builds up and it needs a place to go, electricity will find the path of least resistance. This is a great outlet for it, but this one is kind of calling to it. So when the arc jumps, it's going to go through the southern wall, the one that we found in the 1800s when we drilled through it and found the conduit. Prior to that, there was a crack in the wall. Now at the time, again, no one had really been arc welding or anything, so that crack just looked like a crack. But when you look at pictures of it before they drilled the wall, and even today, even though they've patched it up, you can still see it. Better to look at pictures from the 1800s and 1700s. That is an electric crack. They're spark evidence of electricity arcing through that wall for hundreds of years. That is how they got the electricity off of the structure into the battery. What they did with it, we can throw out hundreds of things that they could have done with it. What would you do with electricity? I don't think they had cell phones, but definitely could have been making colloidal silver. They were definitely electroplating jewelry, plates, and they definitely had batteries. Look at the Baghdad battery and many other things. So they were utilizing it, and the fact that they were utilizing it is evident in the evidence. This is my suggestion of how they didn't generate electricity, they quarantined it and collected it. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And I can definitely go over the fine details of this structure. I have many videos, and I will gladly give you references or answer any questions. You can reach me at GreatGizaPyramid.com, Giza Pyramid Project, 657-229-Giza, which is 4492. You can also send text messages there. I don't often answer the phone, but I will be glad to return your calls. Skype, Zoom, Facebook chat, I don't care. I'll do it all. Ask me questions, I'll answer.